Great news, everybody! I caught the white whale! Now what? Hello, my name is Margaret Adele. I'm still not fully back to BookTube, but I did still want to talk about the fact that I got my TBR to literal 0. But today, instead of talking about how I did it, I want to talk about what life is like after it. Because the last video I uploaded about how I achieved it, I actually hadn't achieved it very long before filming that. I had pre-filmed a lot of clips as I was getting close to 0, and then the actual yay, I have hit 0 was filmed like within an hour after I actually hit that number. I read the last book, I got the screenshot from Goodreads, I shared it around online, and then I promptly began filming. So I had no real experience with a TBR after 0. And admittedly, it did not stay at 0 for very long. By the time that video was uploaded, it was already back in the double digits. So now it's been about 6 weeks later, and I wanted to talk about how my reading is different after a 0 TBR, the pros and cons. There are some cons to it, and just in general, how I feel like I am in a new era of my reading. So let's jump in. The first pro and con go together. The pro being that I feel so energized to tackle other reading challenges, to do readathons. I am on track to beat the Pop Sugar reading challenge earlier than I ever have before, and I'm already planning on other little challenges to do, but all of that comes with the knowledge that nothing else will hit as hard as a TBR 0. I have already hit the heights. In the modern bookternet, a 0 TBR is damn near mythic. There's a large portion of the online booktube populace that thinks that it's not even possible, that thinks that everyone who is trying to do the challenge is just kidding themselves. There's a lot of people trying to do the challenge that are only doing it for a portion of their TBR, like their physical TBR, and not even their whole one, because they don't think it's possible. And so it's like, I've hit the thing. I've hit the thing that so many people think is impossible. Where do you go from there? What do you do after that? How are you going to find another impossible challenge after you've done the impossible challenge? I did find a close second. There is a challenge on the bookternet that is not considered quite as big of a deal, but is still very high up there. And that is getting caught up on all of your series. So that would mean that you are finished with all the series that are done publishing and that you are at the latest installment of every series that is still publishing. So I think that's what I'm tackling next. But even then, I know, like, it's not going to be as big. And I just have to accept that I have already done the big thing and that I'm not going to hit that again, and that I am probably going to spend all that energy on a lot of smaller challenges, but multiple at once rather than that. But it is a big shift in my reading style because it took me 2.5 years from the time I started that challenge to the time I got to 0. And I got used to having a constant challenge overhead, even in the days when I was like technically done, back when I thought I was only going to get down to 50. You can check that previous video if you want more details. I was still like low-key under that idea of getting my TBR lower, hence why my TBR naturally got lower even when I technically wasn't doing the challenge. So after literal years of being under that mindset, I'm kind of left in the lurch that I don't have a big challenge to formulate what I'm doing anymore. But I will make it work. I'll probably start picking up a lot more of the yearly reading challenges that different publications put out. I'll start getting into more readathons. And like I said, I am going to try to get caught up on all of my series. But it's kind of hard to convince my brain that like that adrenaline high, we're only ever going to get a little bit close. We're not actually going to hit it ever again. The second pro-con pair is money. Namely, that I am saving a lot of money with my new spending habits, but it doesn't feel like that because I'm so much more aware of my spending habits. Before, when I was getting books, it was a lot more haphazard, a lot of nickel and diming. Oh, this book looks cool, let's get it, and immediately bought it. And as a result, I would end up with a lot of books, but not a lot of cognizance on how much money I actually spent on them because I wasn't adding up the totals as I went. Now I buy all of my books in small batches. So if I am buying a book through Thrift Books, which I am doing for certain series and certain Pop Sugar prompts, I will wait until I have a total big enough to get free shipping, which for Thrift Books is $15. So it's not a lot, but it's also used books, so you're at least going to get a couple in every cart with that. And then I buy that one. And then for ebooks, I wait until I have rolled for a specific prompt or I specifically need that book, then I buy it. So I end up buying a lot of ebooks in one sitting at either the tail end or very beginning of a month, depending on when I do my monthly TBR challenge. So I am objectively spending less, but because I am so much more focused on it and cognizant of the money that is leaving my account, it feels like more. Not because it is more, but because I'm actually paying attention. And it's kind of a double-edged sword in that way, but I wouldn't trade it. I like having more money. I like having more purpose in my spending and putting more effort in. Like I mentioned in my Zero TBR challenge video from before, I like researching and finding it out and finding what's the cheapest place to get it. Does my library have it? Is the ebook going to be cheaper than the used book? Most of the time for a trad published book, no. If you want a trad published book for cheapest, you'd be better off just filling a cart till you get free shipping and buying from there from Thrift Books. Like, not even worth it with ebooks anymore, at least from trad publishing. Anyway, I am aware of my spending. Therefore, it feels like more when it is objectively less, which I don't know if that's ever going to go away, but it is kind of the downside of trying to save money is that the only way to really cut extraneous spending is to become hyper aware of your spending. Maybe I'll get used to it, but for right now, even spending that, $20 on a Thrift Books cart or not even $20 on ebooks feels like so much more than the months where I was spending, $50 on books that I wasn't paying attention to. The third pro-con pair has to do with freedom, because yes, after a Zero TBR, I do feel a lot freer. I am not being bogged down by hundreds of books and feeling like I have to get to them and seeing how long ago I'd bought this, that, and the other thing and all the money I spent that I'm not using. And it's a lot more freeing to just be like, oh yeah, I only have less than 20 books that I own that I want to get to. And I am going to the library more often. And I am back on NetGalley. I actually requested and got some NetGalley arcs again because I just feel like I have more space and time and wherewithal that I didn't have before. Until it comes to readathons. Because the modern readathons across the bookternet are made with the assumption that you have a gigantic TBR to choose from. Now, my own TBR game that I pick from is tailor-made to my taste, to my wants, to my spreadsheets. I have spreadsheets of books that I want to get to and challenges that I want to complete, and my TBR game's prompts are specifically made to make that happen. It took me a while to figure out, but yes, I have finally engineered a game specifically for what I already desire to do. Readathons, however, are somebody else's system and what they want people to do. And so it's a little bit different, and I have a lot less books to choose from, at least in my regular TBR. And so it's a lot harder. And I am currently participating in the Fablin Readathon, which is one of those readathons where you don't get the entirety of the prompts beforehand because it is a D&D inspired readathon. So you're going through the quest and you end up in situations and you get 3 different prompts to pick from to choose how your character will solve the situation. And in Act 2, there was a prompt that I was nearly tearing my hair out over because I could not find a book on my TBR that fit that prompt. And eventually I found like the tiny image in the corner of a cover that counted for a prompt, and I could finally make it work, but that's it. It was that one book across 3 prompts that counted for that act encounter. And that is probably going to keep happening moving forward, at least for those you will not know the prompts till they're dropped type readathons. And to be clear, I don't usually participate in those kind of readathons. I probably would not have participated in this one if it was not both D&D inspired and by my fellow Margaret, the word nerd. So I probably won't be participating in those kind of readathons very often moving forward. But it is a big reminder that Readathons and reading challenges in the modern bookternet are not made with small TBRs in mind, and I'm not saying they should be. Like I mentioned before, the zero TBR is damn near mythical, and a lot of people do have giant TBRs, and so a lot of these readathons are actually made to get their TBRs lower, and I'm always on board with that. It's just I'm going to have to make changes about what some of those prompts mean to me and ask the awkward questions, and it's awkward because I feel like it's bragging. I don't want to feel like I'm bragging when I'm like, I don't have any books on my TBR that have been on there for longer than a year. So what should I do for that prompt? But regardless, I've never been the biggest readathon person in the first place, so it's not a huge loss, but it probably is going to change how I engage with those community readathons moving forward. The fourth pro-con pair is enjoyment versus frustration. The enjoyment being that I'm just enjoying my books more. Part of my Zero TBR challenge was really honing in on what my actual interests were, what did I actually want to read, and becoming self-aware and self-honest with what I would actually want to put in front of my face versus what did I want to appear to be the kind of person that read. And in doing so, I have gone upwards in my star ratings. I used to give out a lot of 3 stars, and now it's mostly 4 and 5 stars. I do still give out some 3s and even some 2s. I almost never give out 1s as a rule because I'll DNF the book before I get to that point, but my average star rating has actually increased as a result of this, and it's super nice to just enjoy reading more overall because I'm not trying to force myself to get through a bunch of books just because I've already spent money on them. Now, the frustration is in getting those books because I have to pay a lot more attention to things like shipping times and waiting lists. I'm waiting a lot longer to get those books. I'm not just letting a pile build up in my TBR. And as a result, it might be that I put a book on a TBR that hasn't even arrived at my house yet. I have done a lot more track shipment clicking than I have ever done before in my life as a reader, hoping and praying that that book gets here before the end of the month, or checking my spot on the waiting list for the library because, again, I really want to get that book soon. I had intended to read it soon, and that's a lot of frustrating. And I'm not exactly sure how I would change that, if at all. Obviously, I can't change library waiting lists, and I am building up enough of a backlog, theoretically, that I'm not as desperate for thrift books like that original 7-book delivery that I got from Thrift Books right after I had gotten my Zero TBR. I was checking it several times a day because I'm like, I don't have any physical books to read right now. I really need these. I was relying on my library a lot at the time, but not even those were on waiting lists because I had literally no physical books. I do have a little bit of physical books now, so I can fall back on them if the Thrift Books challenge or Thrift Books shipment times become a challenge, but it is a lot more annoying to have to wait more. And this is also why I talked about before, the critics comment, just buy one book, then read it, and then get the next book critique against bigger TBRs never sat well with me because it's like, books take a while to get to you. Small batches are more efficient. That way you're not sitting around not reading while you wait for the next bit. But the waiting for the next bit, it's still annoying regardless. The last pair is a pro pair, and it is all about having to deal with physical books post Zero TBR because I hated having to deal with unhauling physical books in my Zero TBR challenge. It was so annoying because, well, a lot of people want to donate used books, but they don't actually want to buy them. So a lot of places get very easily overwhelmed with people offloading gigantic amounts of used books without actually then buying any more off their hands. In fact, one of the used bookstores in my area had to close for that issue because they would get giant amounts of stock, but not a lot would actually be purchased. And I'll admit it, I was one of the worst for it. I'd dropped off entire full bags, and then I would see the entire full bags that other people had dropped off, and I'm only walking out with maybe 1 or 2 new books, if that. And I did feel bad. And so eventually I had to like spread out where I donated the books. And so I would go to the library, because my library has a little charity shop attached to it where all of the proceeds from it are donated back to the library. So I'm like, okay, that'll work. And then I did little free libraries, and then I opened a Pango store, but Pango's not really reliable for like large scale unhauling. And hopefully I'm going to try to get a little free library in front of my own house. And so that will likely end up being my primary source of unhauling in the future. Because while I have sold a couple things on Pango books, it's not really worth it as like a standard system of unhauling. Most of the time, I just save it for the newer books that I know are more likely to be bought, and had to unhaul, my mass market paperbacks from the early 2000s elsewhere. Regardless, now when I have to deal with physical books, it's so much easier because I have so much less, and I am taking in so many fewer books. Most of the books that I'm getting at this point are usually, again, either for a reading challenge prompt or a continuation of a series that I already know I like. So while that doesn't mean that I'll never need to unhaul physical books again, it's a lot less likely moving forward, and those that I will unhaul will be a lot smaller in number. I am just turning more and more into an ebook girly the longer I go. And with all that being said, I am happy that I have more space on my shelves now. The second part of our pair. I, at one point, was like literally out of shelf space. Even doing this stuff, putting them sideways, like I was literally even hitting the top. Like I had none, and now I finally have space to fill again. And I know the old adage on the internet is just get more shelves. I have a small house. Get more shelves is not a viable solution at all. But clearing out books is. Now I do have a lot of space, and I am totally on board for making my shelves look like a used bookstore, because I like the used bookstore vibe. I don't need my shelves to look super pretty. I just need physical space on them. And now I have that. I am unhauling less. I have more space on my shelves. I just have less stress of having a large amount of material goods, because everyone likes to talk about, books as being so awesome, but a gigantic amount of material goods is still stressful. And I realized that once I started cutting down on the material goods we were bringing into our house. So it is much nicer to have less, actually, at least in this instance. And I hope that moving forward, I can keep my unhauling low. I'm hoping that other people will want to contribute to whatever little free library I put up, because low-key, maybe I want to see what other people put in there and get it for myself. I don't know. But regardless, overall, just nicer. And that is it. The pros and cons of a life post a zero TBR. Would you ever want to try a zero TBR? Have you ever tried it? Have you ever gotten your TBR lower? What was it like? Do you think there are certain pros and cons to having a bigger TBR? Let me know in the comments down below. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.